The terminal buzzed with the low hum of early morning travelers, rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and the occasional clink of coffee cups. Gate B-12 sat in a quiet corner of Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson, where a regional jet crew prepared for a short hop to Charlotte. Captain Thomas Whitaker, a veteran pilot with salt and pepper hair and pressed uniform wings, stood near the window sipping burnt airport coffee and eyeing the crowd with practiced detachment. He'd flown thousands of flights, met all kinds of passengers, and prided himself on keeping things orderly, even if that meant stepping in before trouble started. So when he noticed a lone black boy, maybe 11 or 12, wandering near the jet bridge without an adult in sight, he stiffened. The boy had on a NASA hoodie and carried a tablet in one hand, eyes scanning the nearby aircraft through the glass. He wasn't loud. He wasn't disruptive, but Thomas's instincts, or what he'd convinced himself were instincts, began to buzz. He watched as the boy lingered by the restricted area sign, close to the gate entrance. "Excuse me, young man," Thomas said, stepping forward. "Are you supposed to be here?" The boy turned, startled but polite. "I'm just watching the planes, sir. My dad's in the lounge. He said I could come look." "And where's your boarding pass?" Thomas asked, voice firmer. "I don't have it. My dad has everything." The boy shifted his weight. "He said we weren't boarding yet." To Thomas it sounded rehearsed, suspicious. Something didn't sit right. The boy wasn't acting up, but his presence felt out of place, and it was that thought, fleeting and unspoken, that made him reach for his radio. "Security," he said into the mic, glancing again at the boy who had gone back to watching the tarmac. "We may have an unaccompanied minor loitering near the jetway, at gate B-12. Please send someone to check it out." Within minutes, 2 airport police officers appeared. The boy turned to them, confused but calm. One officer asked him to step aside. Another radioed in. Thomas stood nearby, arms folded, justifying it all in his head. Safety first. Can't be too careful these days. He watched as the boy was led to a bench, his tablet taken for questioning. People began to notice. A few passengers stared. A flight attendant furrowed her brow. "Really, Tom?" she whispered to him. "He's just a kid. Protocols," Thomas muttered. Then everything changed. A tall black man in a dark blue suit appeared from the far end of the concourse, walking briskly but without panic. His expression was unreadable, professional but focused. People made space instinctively. He approached the officers, eyes briefly landing on the pilot, then settling on his son. "Are you okay?" the man asked the boy gently. "Yes, Dad," the boy replied. "He called the cops on me." The man turned to the officers. "I'm Administrator Miles Thompson. This is my son, Jordan. We are confirmed passengers on Flight 4823. I stepped away to take a secure FAA call in the lounge, and my son remained here with my full knowledge. Is there a problem?" Silence. One officer stammered, "No, sir. Just a misunderstanding." Thomas blinked. "FAA? Administrator?" Thompson turned, his gaze locking with Thomas's, calm but piercing. "You're the one who made the call?" Thomas straightened, the weight of the badge on Thompson's lapel finally sinking in. Federal Aviation Administration. The man who set safety standards for people like him. The man whose decisions could ripple through entire airlines. "I was just following procedure," Thomas said, his voice suddenly dry. Thompson didn't respond immediately. He placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, then looked back at the officers. "We're done here." He walked away, his son beside him, heads held high. Thomas stood motionless, a gnawing pit opening in his gut. He hadn't just profiled a kid, he had profiled the wrong kid. Captain Thomas Whitaker stood alone, at gate B-12, his thoughts louder than the chatter of the boarding crowd around him. The adrenaline from his quick judgment was gone, replaced by a bitter taste in his mouth. He replayed the boy's face, calm, curious, utterly harmless, and the man's voice, measured but heavy with quiet authority. "I'm Administrator Miles Thompson." The name had echoed in Thomas's mind like a dropped wrench on a hangar floor. He knew who that was. Thompson wasn't just a bureaucrat with a badge, he was the top official in American aviation. The very man whose signature was on every safety bulletin, training directive, and regulatory reform Thomas had followed for the last 5 years. He'd watched him speak at conferences, read his op-eds in Aviation Today, admired his climb to leadership, even if he never said so out loud. Now he had profiled his son. "Tom," came a voice beside him. It was Alyssa, his first officer, mid-30s, sharp-eyed. "You okay?" "I'm fine," he muttered, though his stomach was knotting. "You sure? Because from where I'm standing, that looked bad." He rubbed his brow. "Look, he was standing near the gate entrance. No boarding pass, no parent, you know the protocols." Alyssa crossed her arms. "Yeah, I also know the difference between safety protocols and jumping to conclusions. You saw a black kid and made assumptions. You called the cops on a child." Thomas flinched. He didn't like being called racist. He'd never used a slur, never mistreated a passenger, at least not in his eyes. But something about how calmly Alyssa said it, disappointed, not angry, pierced deeper than if she'd shouted. "It's not like that," he said weakly. She looked away, then back. "You didn't even ask a gate agent to verify if he was on the manifest, did you?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. She was right. Meanwhile, word was spreading. Thomas noticed glances from airport staff. A young woman at the counter whispered to a colleague. A ground crew member paused mid-walk, squinting up toward the gate window where the boy had stood, and then came the email. His phone buzzed. Subject: immediate debrief required. Incident at gate B12. It was from the airline's director of flight operations. Thomas swore under his breath. Before boarding, he was told to report to the airline's operations office after landing in Charlotte. His crew would fly without him. They were sending a replacement captain. As he stepped away from the gate, he caught a glimpse of Jordan again. The boy was now seated quietly next to his father near another gate, the NASA hoodie bunched slightly around his shoulders. He was reading something on his tablet, unfazed. But Thompson? Thompson didn't look up. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence was enough. The interview room was small, quiet, and overly air-conditioned. A table, 2 chairs, and a laptop facing Thomas. Across from him sat Marla Chan, the airline's legal liaison. Her expression was unreadable. Her tone clipped. "We've reviewed the security footage and audio," she began. "You did not consult gate personnel before contacting airport police. You initiated the call directly to security based on personal suspicion." Thomas sat still. Chan leaned forward slightly. Administrator Thompson filed a formal complaint citing racial profiling, misuse of authority, and inappropriate escalation. He also CC'd the Department of Transportation. Thomas blinked. "He's going public?" "No," she replied. "He's not interested in press. He wants accountability." That word landed like a hammer. "We're placing you on temporary suspension pending full investigation," Chan said, tapping on her laptop. "You'll need to meet with the compliance board next week. You may also receive a request to meet with Administrator Thompson directly." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "He wants to talk to me." "Apparently," she said. "And for what?" "It's worth. He didn't ask for your job. But he asked for your attention." Thomas swallowed, suddenly unsure if that was better or worse. Miles Thompson stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the FAA regional office in Atlanta, overlooking the runways below. Planes taxied across the tarmac like clockwork, routine, efficient, mechanical. But even the most well-oiled systems broke down when bias crept in. Behind him, Jordan sat in a leather chair, legs swinging just above the floor. He was quiet but not upset, curious, more than anything. He had questions, he always had questions, but this time he wasn't sure how to ask them. "Why did that man call the police on me?" he finally asked. Miles didn't turn around. He stared at a jet lifting into the sky. "Because sometimes," he said carefully, "people assume the worst about us before they ever ask our names." Jordan frowned. "But I didn't do anything wrong." "No, son, you didn't." He finally turned, walked over, and knelt so they were eye level. "Listen to me. What happened back there? It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But it's Something you need to understand because people like us, we move through the world with a little extra weight on our shoulders. Jordan looked down. It's not fair. No, Miles said gently. But we don't let that stop us. We learn, we teach, and when we can, we hold people accountable. Not with anger, but with truth. Jordan nodded slowly. Is that why you're not yelling at him? A flicker of a smile touched Miles's lips. Yelling doesn't change minds. Conversations do, lessons do. Just then, a soft knock at the office door interrupted the moment. A young assistant stepped inside. Administrator Thompson, Captain Whitaker has arrived. He's waiting in conference room 3. Miles rose and straightened his tie. Good. Keep Jordan here. I'll be back soon. The room was plain and sterile. Glass walls, muted carpet, and a long oak table. Thomas Whitaker sat at the far end, visibly uncomfortable in his civilian clothes. His pilot's wings weren't pinned to his chest today. He stood as Miles entered, then quickly sat when offered no handshake. Captain Whitaker, Miles began, taking a seat across from him. You know who I am, but I want to hear from you. Why are you here? Thomas cleared his throat. To apologize and to explain. Miles nodded. Go ahead. Thomas clasped his hands tightly on the table. When I saw your son alone at the gate, I thought he was a security risk. Not because he was doing anything wrong, he wasn't, but because I let fear and assumptions guide my reaction. I didn't verify his name. I didn't check the manifest, I just called security. He exhaled. It wasn't about safety. It was about bias. I see that now. Miles listened silently. Thomas added, I've flown for 26 years. I've handled emergencies, made tough calls. But what I did at that gate, what your son experienced, wasn't professional. It was profiling. I failed. The words hung in the air, stark and raw. Finally, Miles leaned forward. Why do you think this matters to me, Captain? Thomas blinked. Because you're his father. And because you lead the FAA. Miles shook his head. It's not just that. It's because your decision, one moment of unchecked bias, sends ripples through a system that I've spent my entire career trying to make fair. Your actions told my son he didn't belong, even in a space where he had every right to be. Thomas nodded solemnly. I don't want your resignation, Miles said. I want your growth. I want you to take what happened and use it to lead better, to think better. Thomas swallowed hard. I will. Good, Miles said. He stood, and this time offered his hand. Thomas took it. As Miles turned to leave, he added, Captain, the sky is big enough for all of us. Make sure your flight deck reflects that. Captain Thomas Whitaker sat alone in his apartment that evening, the sounds of planes overhead faint but constant, reminders of the world he had always understood so clearly. But now everything felt different. His authority, once absolute in the cockpit, now seemed fragile in the face of what he had learned. The conversation with Administrator Thompson hadn't gone how he expected. There had been no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just calm, unflinching truth. And somehow that was worse. The quiet grace with which Thompson had carried the weight of the moment unsettled Thomas more than any punishment ever could. He opened his laptop and typed, racial profiling in aviation. The search results stunned him. Articles, case studies, lawsuits, testimonies from black pilots, passengers, and employees, all describing the same feeling he had forced on Jordan, that their presence was constantly questioned, their legitimacy always challenged. He had never looked before. He'd never needed to. The next morning, Thomas returned to the airport, not to fly, but to meet with the airline's internal diversity officer, Lena Grant. She was tall, composed, and regarded him with the kind of gaze that said, I've heard it all before, so what makes you different? I want to help, Thomas began. I want to understand what I don't know. She studied him. Captain Whitaker, most people come to me after an incident because they're trying to save their careers. Are you trying to save yours? No, he said honestly. I'm trying to save my integrity. That made her pause. He went on. I've been in this system for decades. I thought following the rules meant I was being fair, but I never questioned who wrote those rules. I didn't realize how often they leave people out, people like Jordan. Lena nodded slowly. That's a start. They spoke for over an hour. She gave him resources, books, studies, personal accounts. She invited him to attend the airline's next Internal Equity and Inclusion Forum. And then she asked him something unexpected. Would you be willing to speak to a group of our junior pilots, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds? Tell them what happened, what you've learned? Thomas hesitated. You want me to tell that story? No, she replied. They need you to tell it. Because when someone with your seniority admits fault and shows growth, it makes space for change. It makes space for truth. Days later, Thomas stood at the front of a conference room filled with young pilots, men and women, black, brown, Asian, white. Some wore fresh uniforms. Some still trained on simulators. All watched him with curiosity and caution. He didn't sugarcoat anything. I made a decision based on fear and bias, he told them. I called security on a boy because I assumed he didn't belong. That boy's father is Administrator Miles Thompson. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I've flown thousands of hours, he continued. But that day, I failed at something far more important than flying. I failed at being fair, and if I can't admit that, then I don't deserve to lead anyone in the air or on the ground. Hands went up. Questions poured in. How did it feel to be called out? What did you say to the father? Have you faced consequences from your airline? Why did it take this long for you to see it? Thomas answered everyone, honestly, without defense. As the session ended, a young black woman approached him. Her name tag read, Cadet A. James. She looked no older than 23. I almost quit last month, she said softly. I didn't think people like me had a future here, but hearing you own your mistake, it makes me think maybe things can change. Thomas's throat tightened. They can, he said, and they will, if people like you stay, and people like me do better. Jordan walked the hallways of the FAA regional office, a silent observer to the daily bustle of aviation professionals in suits and uniforms. His father had brought him in again, not because of more fallout, but because he wanted Jordan to see what happened when people did the right thing after getting something very wrong. He peeked through a glass panel into a meeting room where his father stood at the head of the table, speaking with a panel of advisors and civil rights experts. Jordan didn't catch the words, but he saw the tone, measured, thoughtful, serious. And there was something else, momentum. He turned as the door beside him opened. Thomas Whitaker stepped out. Hey, Jordan, the pilot said softly. Jordan didn't answer at first. He just looked up at the man who had once looked down on him. My dad said you're working on stuff now, he finally said. I am. Thomas nodded, trying to be part of the fix, not part of the problem. Jordan tilted his head. Are you scared? Thomas considered that. I was. I'm not anymore. I'm just awake. Jordan gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, and walked on, but Thomas felt it. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. Back at the airline headquarters, a new initiative was underway, Project Skystep, a program co-led by Lena Grant and, surprisingly to many, Captain Thomas Whitaker. It aimed to increase awareness of implicit bias, especially in airport security and flight operations. Workshops were held for staff, including pilots, gate agents, and security personnel. Some employees grumbled about the change. Political correctness, one whispered. Overreaction, muttered another. But others, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, felt seen, heard, and validated for the first time in their careers. At one workshop, Thomas stood before a whiteboard covered in sticky notes from a group exercise titled Assumptions We've Made. He read one aloud. Thought a young man with dreadlocks and a hoodie didn't belong in first class. Turned out he was a tech CEO. The room was quiet. Some nodded. A few looked away. This, Thomas said, tapping the note. is exactly what nearly cost me my career, and worse, my humanity. I assumed. I let fear dress itself up as professionalism, and a 12-year-old kid was humiliated for it. He paused. If it can happen to me with 26 years of experience, it can happen to anyone. But if we admit it, own it, and do the work, it doesn't have to happen again. Meanwhile, Miles Thompson was doing more than advising. He was implementing. Policy memos were rewritten. FAA training for airport personnel was expanded to include modules on racial profiling, cultural competency, and de-escalation without bias. A new reporting hotline was launched for travelers who believed they were unfairly targeted. But Miles knew it would take more than paperwork. At a public press conference, he stood beside airline CEOs, civil rights leaders, and pilot union reps. This is not just about one boy, one pilot, or one incident, he said into the sea of cameras. This is about the quiet erosion of trust that happens when institutions don't face their failures. That ends now. We are not just asking for better. We are building better. When the event ended, he spotted Jordan at the edge of the crowd. You ready to go home? He asked. Jordan nodded, then added, I think I want to fly again. Miles smiled, pride swelling in his chest. Then we'll book a trip this weekend. That evening, Thomas wrote an email. It was short, direct, and from the heart. Dear Jordan, thank you for your courage. You gave me the chance to see clearly and change. I hope one day we can talk again. I still have a lot to learn. Captain Whitaker. He hit send, not expecting a reply, but maybe, just maybe, planting something in the soil of humility and truth. The terminal buzzed with its usual energy, rolling suitcases, murmured announcements, a child's laughter echoing from a nearby gate. At gate 32, Jordan Thompson sat beside his father watching planes taxi across the tarmac. His sneakers tapped a slow rhythm on the floor. You nervous? Miles asked, glancing at his son. Jordan shrugged. A little, but it feels different. This time. Miles smiled. Good. It should. It was Jordan's first flight since that day. The memory of it still lingered. The sharp humiliation, the confusion, the sting of being judged before he had said a single word. But now, those feelings had softened. Not because they vanished, but because something had been done about them. Their boarding group was called. As they walked down the jet bridge, Jordan paused, peeking into the cockpit as they passed. The co-pilot greeted them with a smile. And there, in the captain's seat, was a familiar figure. Captain Thomas Whitaker turned, and for a brief moment, he and Jordan locked eyes. He stood. Good morning, Mr. Thompson, Thomas said, voice steady. Jordan blinked. You're flying this plane? I am, Thomas said. And if you'll allow me, it would be my honor to fly you today. Miles, standing just behind Jordan, waited for his son's reaction. The boy's face was unreadable at first, but then he nodded once, firmly. Okay, Jordan said, just don't mess it up. Thomas let out a breath, half a chuckle, half relief. You got it, Captain. The flight was smooth, peaceful even. As the plane climbed above the clouds, Jordan pressed his face to the window and watched the world fall away. He didn't think about fear or suspicion. He thought about altitude, velocity, possibility. When they landed, Thomas waited at the gate, his pilot's cap in hand. I just wanted to say thank you again, he said. Not just for this flight, for everything. You didn't owe me anything, but you showed me something I couldn't see on my own. Jordan looked up at him. I didn't do anything special. You did, Thomas replied. You told the truth, and that's where all change starts. He extended a hand, not stiff or formal but open. Jordan hesitated, then shook it. From a few feet away, someone raised a phone and snapped a photo. Two people, once separated by fear, now standing in mutual recognition. That image would later appear in an FAA publication titled Flight Paths Toward Justice. Weeks later, Thomas stood in front of a new cadet class at the airline's training facility. Behind him was a massive screen displaying a simple message. Bias is invisible until you choose to see it. He began, not with stats or policies, but with a story. There was a day I made a call, he said. Not because there was danger, but because I mistook my own assumptions for facts. I humiliated a child. That child's father could have ruined me. Instead, he invited me to rise. Cadets listened in rapt silence. That moment didn't end. My career, it changed its purpose. If we're going to fly people safely, we have to see them first, all of them. One cadet raised his hand. Captain Whitaker, do you think people can really change? Thomas smiled. I'm standing here, aren't I? And Jordan, he joined his school's aviation club, built model planes, read flight manuals. He didn't know if he wanted to be a pilot yet, but now he knew he could. Sometimes he'd stand on the rooftop of their building at dusk, watching jets slice through the orange sky. One day he turned to his dad and asked, "Do you think I'll ever fly one of those?" Miles rested a hand on his shoulder. "I don't think," he said. "I know."